Do we harm our children if we tell them, I love you, but our actions or responses don't line up with that? We still shout, lose our patience, and shame. How can we create a safe and accepting place in our homes for our children to be vulnerable and themselves? What nonverbal expressions of posture and visual clues do our children send us to tell us they are hurting and feel like no one understands them that we just miss? How is our brain wired by fear-based responses? And how does our body hold trauma? My special guest, Tina J. Smith, author of Renewing Our Minds in Love, Integrating Neuroscience and Scripture for Wholesomeness and Healing, is going to answer all of these questions and more on this episode of the Renewed Mama podcast. There is so much goodness in our chat. Hey there, Mama. I'm Kimberly Mutar, and you pushed play to the Renewed Mama podcast. Do you want to be done with the negative, critical tape that keeps replaying in your mind? Do you want to parent without shouting and shaming, even when there is whining, spilled milk, and bad attitudes? Are you looking for a better way to speak to yourself, to your children, and your husband that honors, motivates, and keeps you connected instead of in strife? Then you are in the right place. This podcast is for mamas who want to renew their thoughts, words, and responses. You were made to win in motherhood and to show up as the mama you want to be. Let's learn how together. My special guest is Tina J. Smith, the author of Renewing Our Minds in Love, Integrating Neuroscience and Scripture for Wholesomeness and Healing. Tina is a registered social worker and specializes in trauma and attachment treatment for children, youth, and adults. She counsels families with teenage struggles, suicidal ideation, attempted suicides, grief from the loss of a child, trauma, concerns about child functioning at home or at school, and communication difficulties within families, blended family concerns, and generational conflicts between families. She provides individual, marriage, and family counseling and helps with relationships with in-laws. Tina specializes in trauma-based physiotherapy, where she has helped individuals suffering with post-traumatic stress disorder from negative events or abuse, working as a first-time responder, and religious-based trauma. Tina passionately believes that healing is possible. Hope is possible. Let's jump right into our conversation today about her book, Renewing Our Minds in Love. Tina, I'm so glad to be having this conversation with you. Thank you for making time in your busy schedule to be with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation because I think it's such a needed one.
Yes. Well, your book talks about church leadership and relationship, which is amazing. I loved reading your book, and I encourage all of the renewed mamas to get it. But can we talk through your book in the terms of parenting and our home?
Absolutely. Because, I love about this book is I think sometimes we forget we're all leaders in every aspect of our life. And we have to actually see ourselves as moms, as leaders in our home with our spouses. So we can't actually forget that we're moms who are leading our children to become amazing adults in the future. So we actually can take the same concepts that's in this book because it all applies.
Yes. That's why I loved it so much. So I'm asking some of these questions a little bit selfishly because I want to know the answer to these questions. I know you have lovingly served your clients for so many years, and I know you have the answers to these questions. And I know that your answers will be a benefit to the listeners too.
Absolutely. I love
Okay.
it.
Yeah. So let's talk about the importance of true health having congruence or harmony between our words and the behavior with an emphasis on love. So let me explain. So our
Okay.
words and responses with love should be congruent and in harmony. So if we say to our children, you are loved, if we're not following it up with true demonstrations of love. Tell us more about how we can bring harm or good uh, if we're saying you are loved, but we don't line that up with our actions.
Okay, I love this. I love this question.
Okay.
So kids are very emotionally based, right? They're very sensory oriented. So kids don't sit there and logically have answers to things. They observe the world through their senses. So I think it's important that every mama remembers that your kids are watching you and they're paying attention. And when they feel or see something that's incongruent, the kiddos actually internalize their experiences in their environment. So here's the thing that most parents don't actually know. It's not that kids go around and narrate or verbalize these things like, I don't feel loved. I'm not worthy. My mom makes me feel I'm not good enough. Because I always tell parents are always well intentioned. Parents
Yeah.
always want to be the best parent they can. And I always say there's only good enough parents. We're not trying to achieve perfection.
Right.
We're just trying to get to a place of good enough. So the incongruency starts with one thing, and it's important. It starts in this first area. If you, as a mom, say things like, I love you, honey, but you're negative about yourself. So, say you're a mom that says, oh man, I'm so bad at this, where you
Mm,
look in the mirror and you say, man, I wish I looked different. I wish my clothes didn't look like this. And we can even go to the extreme and say, is there some moms who might say, I wish I wasn't overweight? I wish. And as you can hear, there's a lot of negative.
mm-hmm,
And what kids will see is my mom doesn't even love herself. There is a
mm,
feeling, right? Because remember, kids are sensory and feeling based. So in observation, they're saying, well, my mom doesn't really like herself. My mom doesn't really love herself. But then I hear her say, oh, honey, I'm so proud of you. Well,
uh,
something is now incongruent. So the kiddo is like, I hear you, but there's a lot more negative things happening in our atmosphere of our home. And in that incongruency of those love messages, we can just say love messages can be, I love you. It can be, so I'm so proud of you. But we want to match our how we actually treat ourselves openly in front of our children in addition to actually having expressions behaviorally with our kids. So
mm,
I think the second part to this, because we always have to start with ourselves as moms. The second part to this, if you say, I'm so proud of you, but you always land with the, but you could do it a little bit different.
mm,
What all of us, even as adults, I mean, we can all do this in every relationship. What the kiddo will hear is not the, I'm a proud of you. It's, oh, you just want me to be different.
yeah.
So we need to make sure we stop at that I'm proud of you and tell them why you are proud. Tell them why you love them. And we don't want to tell kids we love them for the output, so to speak. We actually want to love the character of our child.
Yeah.
So when we see a kiddo do something that's so profound, like maybe they're sharing their lunch with their sibling, and you're like, wow, honey, that's incredible that you actually thought about your sister or your brother and you are sharing your food. That looks and that must feel so loving for you. Do you feel loved as you give this to your sibling? I want you to notice how loving that action is. I'm so proud of you. right? So we're actually attributing the I am proud, I love you. Now, we also just want to have those beautiful moments out of nowhere that we actually just say, honey, I just really love you with nothing, right? It's just like
Right.
those spontaneous, because how often, I mean, I think about when my husband says, I just get a text and it just simply says, I love you. I'm like, oh my goodness, it
Yeah.
feels amazing. How much more when our kids just have a hug and they get I love you, and there's congruency in that. There is, I don't need to earn it. I don't need to do anything for this. My
Yeah.
mom is displaying congruency with herself, and my mom is showing me the congruency between love and behaviors with saying, I'm so proud of you. I love you. This is your character. And we don't land on anything else around changing. So those would
Mm.
be the areas that I would sum it up.
Well, that's awesome. And I had no idea that you would take us to the place of making sure that we're loving and speaking well about ourselves and that our children are noticing that.
They
I
really
Yeah, I love that. I encourage the listeners to kind of sit with that. And there's an episode I did just recently on who we are as mamas, our identity, and what we believe about ourselves. So I
do.
encourage mamas to go back to listen to that. But I do want to ask you a bit further. I love that we can just say, I love you to our kids, and there's no buts, and we are just hugging and honoring them for who they are as a person. But what if we have something that needs to be corrected or an
Yeah.
area? Oftentimes I've done like the sandwich method where you're edifying and you're suggesting something to work on it and you're edifying. Is that a mistake?
No,
Or
it's
does
great.
that still work? And is that still congruent and showing we're loving, but maybe calling them up to something
That's
more?
right. Absolutely. And I always say like the bookends of it, right? You want to have some
Okay.
bookends. It's positive, the feedback, and then the positive. And I think where we need to go a step ahead
Okay.
is parents don't always know that maybe the kiddo needs a strategy or practical ways to walk that out. So
Okay.
maybe there's some moms who are like, oh, I'm so frustrated because I tell, my son to do this. And maybe it's as simple as I need your room cleaned. But maybe their concept of clean is very different than my concept. Because
Yeah.
the kids, my one daughter, her concept of clean is like everything has its place.
Yeah.
My other daughter's concept is it's clean when everything's under the bed. Out of sight, out of mind.
Right.
I have to go in and like, so I've gone in and said, honey, so I asked for it to be clean. And she looks at me like, it is clean, mom. I'm like, oh, right. Okay, so your concept of clean is different than mine. So be like, thank you for trying. I really appreciate you coming into your room and cleaning because you did what you were asked. Can I give you some feedback? Clean looks like this. And then ending with, I you could even end it with, I really appreciate your time and commitment. And do you need my help? Is this something we
Hmm.
can do together? Do you need me to show you and we can just land on that and figure it out? Together is such a key point, right? I think we give a
Yeah.
lot of instructions and to-dos, but we forget that often kids are a lot more responsive when we say, how can I help you with you, not just verbalizing it.
You're right.
And so it is like we can't avoid giving our kids correction. It's a part of our role as a leader, right? As a
Uh-huh.
leader, we have to correct, we've got to help. And our kids are going to do things, still have to discipline. But how do you do it in a way that's still loving, in a way? And I love what you said was to call them up higher. Is that our goal is to call them up higher. And I always tell parents too that when we parent today, we parent with foresight into the future. We want to parent based on bringing our kiddos up to be healthy, productive, loving, character driven adults so that we can continue that legacy, right? We want
Right.
caring, kind, loving humans so that they continue to add that to their own children if they have children. So, and we can do that in all spheres. So, and it's important that we parent in that way.
Good. Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that. Going back to the bedroom, we used to get the tour of my mom's room so that
Yeah.
we could make our, and then we had to go back and make our room look like hers. That was the model of clean.
Was the motto of clean. And what's the like, and it's funny because I always think, what is the balance? Like maybe they have a unique way. Like I have to have a
Yeah.
standard that isn't don't do it like mom. And maybe their idea is no, maybe everything is not going to have its place. Maybe it's going to still not be shoved under the bed. Maybe
Right.
it's middle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, isn't being a mom amazing?
Oh my goodness. I learned so much from my kids too. I
Yeah.
actually feel like my kids teach me to be more patient and more humble.
Right. Exactly. Yes. Okay. Let's talk about perceptions and judgments of other people,
Okay.
thinking that we know who they are based on their behavior. So
Uh,
you said in your book, I'm just going to read it,
yep.
perceptions and judgments cause harm when we assume that we know other people based on their behaviors and external attributes, because people rarely show their vulnerabilities in full view.
Yes.
So it's so easy to say to our kids, like, why can't you do that? Like, what were you thinking? I told you how many times? Like, why won't you
Yep.
just do what I ask? So, how can we create a safe place that lets our children be vulnerable and
Mhm.
themselves?
Absolutely. I think for us as moms, we have to understand first and foremost that our kids' behavior, so if we see behaviors and we're like, oh, goodness me, that behavior is not okay, we have to remember that children's behavior, even teenagers' behavior, gives us a window into what's unseen.
Mm,
Our kiddos' behavior is the way they communicate what's happening on the inside. So first we have to hold that information. So if we see our kiddos, like if I'm at a stage in my kids are all teenagers. So I'm in teenage full land of, and it's been interesting. And I get the rolling of the eyes and I get the the 16-year-old who snaps at me and I'm like, okay, if I take that personally, then I'm going to respond very different. But I need to step back first to remember that her response means that something is going on inside because I, in that
mm,
moment, may have just walked in the room and I ask a simple question. And immediately, if I get that response, I have to remember and pause that I need to first reflect what is happening in my child's life today. Was there a conversation? Was there something at school? Was there, did a friend, like I have to be able to step outside myself. And if I can't do that, we actually remove an environment of vulnerability. So
mm,
that's the first. The second piece I would add is, and this is, I say this with, I want all the moms to be not judgmental of themselves.
mm,
We truly have to be compassionate to our stories. We had to be compassionate how we were raised by our own moms, our own dads. We have to reflect that we've got hard, some of us have really hard stories, and maybe we haven't worked on them, or maybe oftentimes it's this, we don't actually know that we should work on them. We've just kind
mm,
of said it's in the past. It's in the past. That's where it's going to stay. We're going to move forward. There's a term in the clinical world. It's not really, it's from the attachment based research. And they coined this term as a simple way for parents to understand is we all have shark music. And so everybody's like shark music. So, as a kid, I think the Jaws movies
yeah.
were 80,
Dun, dun,
that
yeah.
Dana, that yes. And so here's the thing. This is where just to be able to bring this back around to how do we create vulnerable spaces is that when our kiddos respond in a way that triggers us, we're like, it's almost like we feel like we got kicked. It's like, oh my
Mm,
word. If we can't step out of ourselves to first land on what's going on and we feel so triggered, there's almost like a bubbling up, and all of a sudden you snap and you're like, you instantly know, oh man, I shouldn't, that was just too big. That did not match that. And even if it did, I still have to be the parent that has self control. And that's why I want parents to know have some compassion for yourself. What we call that is if there's a trigger within yourself, it is what your shark music is. And I'll give you an example, just so parents can kind of understand, moms
Yeah.
can understand. Say as a little girl, you had a parent, could be mom or dad, who invalidated your story and your experiences. And they were a little bit more harsh or more critical, and you didn't have the validation of your emotional experience. It doesn't mean that what you were experiencing was accurate. It's just there has to be a level of validation and acceptance for a kiddo's emotion.
Hmm.
Well, what that kiddo grows up to learn, it's not safe to have emotions. So I got to do something with these emotions. I got to push them down. I've got to suppress them, or I'm going to be aggressive. I'm just getting it bigger and mightier. I'm going to make sure my parents hear, but then you get punishment. So this cycle continues. So now you have a parent that believes subconsciously, often, it's not something they're articulating,
Right.
that it's not safe or it's okay, and it's not okay to feel my emotions. What happens is we can perpetuate that in our home environments and we don't even know it. So safety and vulnerability comes in our environment when we first accept that it's okay to have a story, that
Mm-hmm.
we've got hard places. Some of our stories are really sad. Some of these stories aren't worked on. And when I get triggered, I got to name that trigger for myself first. Because if I don't do that for myself first, how do I show up for my kiddo if I can't even show up for myself in that
Mm-hmm.
story? And then you can hear how the goal of sitting with your kiddo who's having these big emotions, these big stories, and it just looks like behavior, it's easier to sit, right? So if I have a kiddo, so again, if my teenager is rolling her eyes, at first I'm like, okay, I'm going disrespect, disrespect. I'm like, no, I need to find my ability to have self-control and patience. I'm going to go up to her room. I'm going to knock on her door and I'm going to say, honey, can I just come in? She might snap at me and say, no, I don't want to talk to Benny. I might say, okay, I'm going to come back again. I'm just going to leave. I'm going to respect her space.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to come back. I'm going to come up and see you when you're ready. Or how about this? When you're ready, I want you to come and see me because I really want to know what's happening for you. So, what happens is I try not to always give the lesson or the teaching. It's hard. Please trust me. I am not
Yeah.
doing this perfectly. Um, so we want that's what we need to do more times than not. And it's okay if we fail. I fail, I snap back and I'm like, oh my goodness. And then I have to go apologize and do the
Right.
repair. But safety does come in giving space, especially with a teenager. It's different when it's a younger child. A younger child often needs mom to sit with. So if we have a kiddo who's really young and they're screaming and crying, we're not going to leave them by themselves.
Right.
Safety and vulnerability only occurs in a home when a parent continues to maintain physical proximity.
Mm.
So we don't shove our kiddos in their bedroom and say, until you stop it and come out of your room, then I don't want to see you. That's
Right.
actually not going to create safety or vulnerability. It is, I'm going to sit here with you. And you're not going to do the blame game in that point, right? Safety and vulnerability comes with, I'm going to sit here. You don't have to like what's going on. This isn't about not getting to a place of discipline. This is it's almost like you got to let the tide go. The waves come in
Right.
and eventually the tide goes out. And then when the tide goes out, that's when the room and the behavior subsided. Then you have a conversation. And if discipline is needed, then that happens at that point. But we have to wait. So safety is validating emotion, showing up for your kid as much as you can, never leaving them in isolation. Teenager, we're giving them space, we're letting them develop that independence, creating safety in that vulnerability by, again, showing up, checking in, giving them space to come, responding, and then we can say, it's not okay to roll your eyes. It's not okay to scream. It's not okay to do these things. You know this will be a consequence. There is a little bit more of engagement because here's the other thing too I want to add. I'm going to tell a story. It was actually one of the most profound experiences I've had with a client. I had a youth, and the youth was about, this is years ago. I had a youth who was about 13 years of age, and the parents were having him come for therapy. I sat on my couch and I've been seeing him for quite some bit. We're just working with a lot of different things. And he looked at me one day and he said this, Tina, I wish my parents gave me more rules and more structure and actually disciplined me.
Mm,
So I'm actually saying that because I don't want parents to hear, oh, so I just sit with them and let them be emotional and get away with all that. And that's not what I'm saying.
right.
It's almost like a series of stages. It's like an equation, a math equation. You have to do one thing before you do the next. And so if we can think about that to get to the answer, the equation is in relationship, it is in validation, but the answer still is boundaries and discipline, because that story continued to reinforce the importance that kids actually need that
Right.
in the context of love and relationship. And that really creates the safety, a home filled with safety and vulnerability. Can't have one
Mm.
without the other.
Yes. Oh, so good. I remember with all my children, but especially one just in that when they were really young, in that outburst, I just held them close. I just hugged
Yes.
them, and then I would whisper peace in their ear until you could physically feel them just kind of melt.
I
And
know.
then it's this, they feel safe to say, okay, this is
Yeah,
how we can't behave.
that's
Let's try it
right.
again this way. And then the teaching is ripe. Their heart
Yeah,
is ripe to receive your instruction,
that's
right?
right.
Yeah.
I think the other part, what is important for parents to recognize is that all of us, adults and kids and teenagers, our brain functions in the exact same way. How we take in information is different based on our age, but our brain goes into survival mode very quickly. So if a kiddo is feeling overwhelmed and stressed, and the parent's facial expression is activating this at the same time, our kiddos actually can't help to go into survival mode. It is literally the function of our brain. So
Hmm.
all of a sudden, cortisone is getting extreme. There's adrenaline going. The brain's amygdala is going off and it's setting the alarm. It's like the fire alarm that goes off. And that fight, flight, freeze kicks in, and kids act in ways that they wouldn't when their brain is now neutral and calm and their nervous system has been supported by relationship. So when parents want to speak at a heightened level, when their kiddos heightened, their brain actually cannot even take in information.
Hmm.
They are literally so shut down. So it's actually there's no purpose in it. It almost is that feeling of I feel like I'm wasting my breath. And how often have we felt that way as parents?
Right.
Actually, it's actually factual. There's science behind it that says, yeah, you are. So wait, let's help calm,
Right.
store, and then speak. And because then, as you said, they're open to it. Their heart is more pliable and soft, and their brain can take in this rich information. And kids actually want that.
Hmm.
They don't want to disappoint a parent. They don't want to feel, they actually want their parents to be happy, even when they might not have done life well today. They
Hmm.
still want to see mom smile at them.
Hmm. Oh, it's so good.
Mhm.
So good. Oh, I know that this is going to mean so much to so many listeners. I'm loving this. Okay.
Yeah.
This kind of is tied in this next question, but you say, oh, I can't wait for your answer to this one. You say that your heart breaks when people say, no one asked how I was doing. No one came to see me. And in this case, with your book, you're talking about like a pastor not coming to see someone. But anyway, the idea was that it still made them feel unheard and completely misunderstood. And so
Yeah.
that really spoke to me because Speak Life badges, sticker awards are all about helping children feel seen and heard and celebrated for who they are as a person. So please give us 2 or 3 things that we can do to help our children feel seen, heard, and understood. You've done a little bit with when they're just holding them and giving them space and things like that, but how can we help them feel seen and heard and understood without judgment? Because as you say in your book, that's when we truly love others.
Hmm. Okay, here's a big one.
Yeah.
All of our kids have interests in activities, and sometimes parents don't like those activities, because it could be it could be a video game, it could be a board game, and you're like, oh my goodness, I don't want to play that board game. What happens is the kiddo receives that information and says, oh, they want to be with me. So when a child feels seen, is we show up in the way the child shows up.
Mm.
So meaning if the kiddo likes to play a video game and you're not a video game person, that kiddo will actually feel seen when you do the very activity that they like. And that is so important. Like we have seen, like, oh my goodness, I have stories where my kids have wanted me to play, like video games would be one of those hard things
Yeah.
for me. I'm like, oh, you want me to play a video game?
Yeah.
And how often do they ask? And I'm like, okay. And they're so excited. They're like, Mom, game. I'm like, yep. And I'm gonna like it.
Yeah.
I'm working on my facial expressions. But they're so pumped because it's all of a sudden we know that actually mom doesn't like doing this, but I'm seeing right now because she is actually showing up in the way that I love because this is what I like. So the second thing would be this. It is so important for parents to go up to their kids' room when they are in the room and say they've come in the door and they're up in the room and they haven't said anything. One of the key things I hear a lot of parents assume it's a perception. So we're just going to break this perception that kids just want to be left alone. And I got to tell you, that is a myth. Kids actually want you to go up, knock on their door, depending on the age. If they're little ones, you've got the door open. Maybe they've ran upstairs or they've been upstairs for a long time and they're playing. No matter what, kids want the parent to be intentional with going into their bedrooms and saying, hey, just wanted to come and see you. I just wanted to check in on you. Are you okay?
Yeah.
That is so key. We don't want to yell at the top of the bottom of the stairs and say, so and so, can you come down?
Yeah.
Right? We want to actually go all the way up and we want to be intentional. That makes the kiddo seen. So you get the theme. Here's the theme. We have to get over ourselves as parents to be able to enter into the space of our child, to actually experience their world and the way they experience their world. We need to actually run to them, go to them. This is not creating spoiled children. I always tell parents the concept of spoiling your child with intentionality in relationship does not exist. Spoiled children is about materialism, not relationship. Right. Relationship cannot spoil children. Your child is crying, you hold them. If your baby's crying, you hold them. It does not create a spoiled. It actually creates a healthy, functioning child who becomes a healthy, functioning adult.
Right.
So we need to attend and be present. And I always say too, just because your kiddos may not be sleeping through the night. So for these mamas who have little babies, parenting is a 24-hour, 7-day a week. It is such the greatest joy. You will never regret it, even in those hard nights that you're up with your child. Parenting is nighttime. Parenting is daytime. We show up. We have boundaries. We still got to pour back into ourselves.
Right.
And we still have to do all those things. But a child is seen when we show up. That is this. And those are two things: knocking on the door, going to check, doing the things that they like to do in their world.
Yes. Yes. Amazing. Amazing. I remember a mom a while ago told me how her boys are teenagers now, but how she used to have like little mom times and she would, like lounge on their bed or, in their bedroom and they'd have little like chat. And she'd be like, so how's your life? How's it going? And stuff like that. And that they still do that even though they're teenage boys. So I was like, I'm going to do that idea. So the same thing, we would do like mom night up after, like, while everybody else was asleep, they'd stay up like 15 minutes later and we would color in my bed or whatever. And it would always be like, so how's your life? How's it going? What do you like about your life? Is there any area you need my help or anything like that? And
yeah, those and not to take for granted those little conversational times, like even if it's like 5 minutes and your kiddo is asking, like my 16-year-old will be driving in the car now.
Yeah, exactly.
And how was your day? And she's like, she's telling me a little bit and then she'll look over me and say, how was your day?
Yeah.
know, right? It's like, yeah, I
Yeah,
can tell her at this age some of the things that are appropriate around because I don't want it just to be because it's the engagement process. When your kiddos
yeah,
are little, they're not going to necessarily ask about you as a mom. But when you create the atmosphere where you're asking, you're intentional, and with you, all of a sudden you have teenagers who, like my son turns 19 this weekend.
mm,
I'm a little bit in this place. How did that happen? But my son, he still comes and cuddles. He still comes
yeah, yay.
on the couch. I know. And I'm a hugger. Like my
Yeah,
kids know that I will just scoop them up. My son, depending on where he's at, he's like, no, we're not doing this now. But he will still sit with me on the couch. He will still snuggle. And it doesn't have to mean that doesn't mean I've been a perfect mom. I have made tons of mistakes, but I have tried to learn how to say I'm sorry, which
yes,
is huge,
yes.
and still doing the repair. And you got to keep showing up. Just keep showing up.
Right, right. And you can do that on the way to the hockey arena.
Yes,
You can do that in the grocery store if you just take one of them with you. Yeah,
that's
you can look for
right.
those small ways. Like even this morning, Jonathan was like, "Hey, Mom, can you help me unload the dishwasher?" Even though I had assigned him the task, right? He just wanted the company. He could totally able to do it himself, right?
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
know. Yeah, it is interesting. Sometimes those menial tasks, like how can we create it as an opportunity of connection? Our family has this like it's become the family tradition. I don't know that my kids would have named that, but raking leaves.
Mm,
My youngest will say, "Oh, it's almost raking leaf time." I'm like, "How is this in my mind?" I'm like, "You like to rake leaves, but it's not the leaf. It's not
yeah.
actually the raking of the leaves. It's that we, as an entire family, we go
Do
out
it
and rake
together.
the leaves together. So we throw
Yeah.
on the worship music, and we're in the backyard and we're raking." And my kids absolutely love that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those moments, don't underestimate. It's not going to be a date night to the movies. It can be just something you got to do around the house, and how can you show up as
Right, right.
hmm.
Well, that gives me hope too with your son still enjoying to cuddle. Because I say that to Jonathan, he's on the ice playing hockey, and I'm like, getting him a wave. I get a wave, at 9. And I'm like, will you still wave to me when you're like, well, he's super cool now, but when you're super
Yeah,
cool and you're like 17 and it's like, mom's still cool. She's waving to me. Will you still
that's
wave
right.
to me?
Yeah. It
Yeah.
comes back around. So there's always this stage where it's like, no. And then it comes back around and they actually have a different appreciation. I would say that's what my son's at. He's
Right.
done a little bit bouts of, but he is still at this full-fledged, like, I will hug my mom. He'll jump on our bed. But
Yeah.
again, it's like, it's just, again, showing up imperfectly. That is, I think, the most important is that showing up imperfectly,
Mm.
whatever that looks like.
Yeah, so good. So good. Tina, you make the statement that sometimes when people are sharing their stories with you, their nervous system is twisted so tightly that their body aches, their breathing is shallow, and their heart races. And you
Mm,
can see the pain in their faces that speaks without words. And there are
mhm,
profound stories. You talked earlier about the stories that we all carry, but those stories are held in nonverbal expressions of posture and visual cues that often go unseen. And those
mhm.
visual cues are like windows that create an opportunity to engage with
Yeah.
people who are hurting and feel like no one understands them. I would love to better understand some of those nonverbal expressions of body and visual cues that our children, even our spouses, our friends, I mean, even my tutoring students, that they're making, but I'm not acknowledging that they are cues. How do we tell us some of those flags that we can recognize and then respond in a way that shows care?
Yeah. I love this because I think so much of us, we are always waiting for the engagement, almost like the verbal, we're waiting for the story or waiting. But if we actually become more aware of our surroundings of people and we actually pause and we observe how people interact, we will actually begin to engage in aspects of their story, because as we were, we've been talking about being intentionally, helping people be seen
Right.
and creating space for vulnerability. Well, what happens is if people haven't been able to be given spaces of vulnerability, they store all of their stories in their body. And so that concept of the nervous system, I always say it's like nervous system is twisted so tight and their brain just spends so much time activated.
Mm.
There's an expression, the more unresolved experience in one's life, it shows up in nonverbal ways. So if we were to observe someone, I think some of the quick ones that I can show, I kind of help people is, when we're driving in a car
Yeah.
and we're kind of slowly going down a main street and we see people walking and we might avert our eyes. And I really want to task people with this.
Okay.
Just look around. Don't look at the stores. Just take a look at the people. What you'll notice is that when a person is walking, you'll notice people will observe it, but they don't actually and be the person that says, I wonder what hardship that person has gone through.
Mm.
These are the individuals you will see them walking and they look down at their feet and they're hunched over. And there's a level of, and this one's a really obvious one, but there's a level of you can just see the heaviness.
Mm.
And what that really is telling us is that their nervous system has come to a place. There's two terms we've actually used. One is hypoaroused, the other one is hyperaroused. When someone's nervous system is in a state of hypo, so we've got like this window. So if everybody thinks about a window, when we have stories stored, we can say trauma or negative events in our life that are unresolved. What happens over time is our nervous system and our brain, depending on how often it has to be activated, we either be here one day really hyper aroused, which is like anxiety, it could be panic attacks, it could be like you just see someone and they look overwhelmed.
Mm.
There's tension. And then the other part is someone who kind of lives at the bottom part. Now, people can go up and down, but someone who looks at the bottom, they looked sluggish. They look, you could tell someone who's depressed.
Okay.
Most of the time, people can observe depression because there's almost a sorrowness about them.
Right.
They don't make a lot of eye contact, or they, a really good key understanding of even people who carry shame is they don't actually feel okay to make a lot of eye contact. So they'll
Mm.
look at, look away, they'll look down. And that is an expression within their body. So we want to seek eye contact. We even want to listen to verbal expressions, right? If someone is completely neutral and they're not even, there's no excitement and they just seem like almost a level of despondency, it's like that's a person that has a story and they don't actually know that this is what it looks like on the outside.
Right.
I would also add aggression or big, strong behaviors is a story, right? Those are typically the people that people are like, I don't know how to approach someone or talk to someone who's really loud and big and bold and almost aggressive by the words they use. I'm
Right.
still going to say that that's a survival expression. That's a person that has gone through so much in their life, even in their kiddos, right? If a kiddo is aggressive, what the aggression says is my world is not safe.
Mm.
And the only way that I keep my world safe is to keep people here rather than close to me. Because I know instinctively when I get really angry or when I have big behavior. So this is what their brain is doing. They don't actually
Yeah.
articulate.
Right.
They will actually be angry and aggressive because it keeps people away from them.
Ah.
We can like name all of these behaviors around people's internal stories. And here's the biggest thing is everything we see with our eyes and hear with our ears are the brain's strategy to keep us safe, even down to little kids. Here, and another interesting thing is when a baby stops crying. So if we let, and I know this is going to be hard for moms who might and didn't know, is that when a baby's crying and crying and crying and they don't get picked up, their brain eventually moves into a level of complacency because they get flooded. And so
Mm.
they'll stop crying because they don't have their safe, secure parent to hold them to create safety. And what happens is their brain will find another level of safety and
Mm,
will stop crying, and baby will become numb. Now, is that a one-time thing? It could happen. We've had experiences that, but what we're looking at is if the reoccurring experience
right.
is not observing and being present. So it can look like a lot of things. Eye contact. I'll sum it up. It could be eye contact. We're looking for how someone's body is positioned, their head down, their back is curved. This applies to kids too. We can all see kids who walk down and they just are hunched
Right.
over. They might kind of feel enclosed to themselves. They might be on the chair enclosed. There's a lot of expressions of stories, and sometimes a simple thing of just engaging in the way that they can engage. We don't want to push because that actually can heighten. We want to actually see what is baby steps towards creating safety. So we're not going in fast, and we slightly engage until the kiddo begins to open up and expresses. And you'll see things like the eyes get averted. They might actually start answering a question. They might give one word answers, which means don't go too fast for me. This is too
Mm,
scary. But all of a sudden they start to give more words and more words, and there's a relaxed experience happening. What the kiddo's brain is saying is, this person's safe for me. I
right.
can start to open up more. And for some kids, it takes a long time to get to that place.
Mm.
So hopefully that helps answer.
Oh, yeah, yeah, I love that. Are there times when we should, and not necessarily the big outburst things, we need to, in a sense, do the opposite then?
That's
But
right.
sometimes they say, like, to mirror the child, like, say, for
Yes.
instance, like I'm not a person who is really like outgoing and wild, and I'm pretty reserved
Yes.
and like this. But
Yeah.
if I have a tutoring student who's like, like this and
Yeah.
bouncy and stuff, I it would shut them down if I'm just like
That's right. Yes.
right, stone
Yes.
face and not so I try to, like, in a tutoring session, I try to mirror some of that
It's
body language,
so
right?
good. Well, and think
Yeah.
about as moms, what do we do when we have infants, when we have babies? Attunement in mirroring is one of the first early stages of attachment, developing secure attachment. So, when babies make the cooing noises and baby
Right.
makes like the funny faces and we make them back, and we're making all of these, like, mimicking and mirroring the noises and the facial expressions that actually needs to carry on
Mm.
for kids and even for adults, right?
Adults,
Like,
yeah.
we're relating to each other. You want to actually, I always say there's an element that we need to be a chameleon, appropriately a chameleon,
Mm. Yes,
right? So
right.
we're not going to, if we have adults who are highly aggressive, we're not going to mirror that. We're going to mirror what we need them to be, not
Right.
from the place of judgment. So if we have a kid who's aggressive, we're not going to mirror that. We're going to validate it's hard, but we want to mirror something that's appropriate. So again, we're mirroring in a way that's appropriate, but we're modeling what's appropriate.
Mm.
But sometimes the blueprints that kids come from, they don't know what is appropriate. So we can
Right.
model that, and they can watch you and they'll feel different about it. But if we're just having normal everyday fun and a kiddo is sitting there and they're a little bit like they're not excitable, we're not going to be excited because this has nothing to do with modeling something appropriate. We're going to model, like, we might come in very casually, sit down, do like something very balanced to match them. So mirroring is important, and then modeling what's appropriate is distinct when it's behaviors we don't want.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So good. So good. Let's talk for a minute about the brain. I
Okay.
loved how you told us a little bit about how the brain is operating with those different stories and things that the child is feeling. But I'm intrigued with how the brain can be wired by fear-based responses. Would you tell us more about that and how to help ourselves and our children out of the fear-based responses?
Okay. So this one's a little bit, again, some of it is the intentionality around showing up. So we've talked a little bit about that, but strictly when we have a brain that gets wired to fear, we first need to understand, how does that happen? Our
Okay.
brain
Yeah.
doesn't just one day open up and say, I'm going to be so wired to fear, I'm going to have a ton of anxiety. So most people don't know that anxiety is actually fear in the brain. We hear a lot of language around, I have anxiety, my child has anxiety. Anxiety is actually inside. If you open the brain up and you actually could see, it's actually the brain is activated. It's living at a very heightened fear-based state, which
Mm.
then it feels like anxiety. It's the nervous system's response to fear. So we then have to ask, well, why is that? How did that happen? Because we can't just unlock something and bring healing if we don't know the why, right? So if we
Hmm.
go to the hospital, this is probably the best way I can help parents, moms understand. If I cut myself, I put a band-aid on it
Yeah.
and I pull it off and I'm like, oh, it's really red. I'm going to keep putting a band-aid on it and I'm not going to do anything. I might try and clean it, but it's still red.
Right.
I think instinctively we all ask the question, there must be something more going on. Like I'm treating, like I put the bandage on, I put some surface ointment on it, but that infection is still happening. So instinctively as moms, after we've tried every surface thing that we possibly can do,
Yeah.
it's not changing. We need to go figure out the cause. And that's what I want parents to understand is that we don't just deactivate a fear by putting a bandage on it or putting some really great ointment on it. We
Yeah.
actually have to ask, what is happening in my kiddo's life? So one of the things I love telling parents to do, not from a place of self, like judging yourself. It's hard. We can't live in this world without something happening. We are
Mm.
living in a world where we can turn on the radio, the news, there's things happening. We don't really know what information our kiddos have taken in that could
Mm.
have activated this fear.
Okay.
So we
Yeah.
have to come from a place of being curious. I always tell parents, adults, let's be curious about our world. Let's be curious about our stories. Let's be curious
Right.
about our kiddos' stories, not from blame, not from judgment, but from a place of self-compassion and compassion for them. So
Right.
I always encourage parents to do a timeline. So what this looks like is you take a piece of paper and you put a line down the middle and you put a positive sign at the top, like a plus sign,
Yeah.
and a negative symbol at the bottom. And
Yeah.
you just go from the day that they were, when you found out you were pregnant. So some mama
Uh,
stories are, I had a ton of physical, I was sick all the time.
right.
Pregnancy wasn't great. That goes on their timeline. That actually has an impact to a baby in utero. So then maybe the birth story was a really hard birth story.
Mm.
That goes on the timeline. Well, maybe in the midst of that, they decide, hey, I'm going to go on vacation. And we have this most beautiful trip to Disney World. That goes on the positive side.
Mm.
On the negative side, anything that appears like negative or traumatic goes on the bottom, and then the positives go at the top. What happens is after you finish a timeline, so you might do like, say, your kiddo is 5 or your kiddo's 10 or 16. You want to track all of the stages of development. So again, we're getting to the root system to fear.
Right.
So when we understand that during different phases of my kiddos growing up, I've had things like loss of an animal is huge for kiddos when they
Mm.
lost a pet, car accidents, loss of close relatives or friends. That all goes on timelines. If a
Right.
kid was bullied, if there's transitions in their home, if they moved a lot, that is impactful. So all of a sudden, we want to add the stories of positivity. We want to say there's been trips, there's beautiful traditions, or all of that.
Hmm.
But when a kiddo is operating out of an activated, heightened fear, you're going to see a demonstration of that. They might say, I have tummy aches. They might have night terrors at night. They might feel like, Mom, I'm just not feeling good. You think it's they're being sick, but most people don't know that we have neural matter in our stomach.
Mm.
When kids say that they're sick, we have to negotiate. Is this really sick? Or is this, I don't want to go to school or I don't want to do
Mm.
this thing? But my kiddo is eating, so it's not flu. What you're going to start to recognize, there is an anxiety that's fear. So we want to look for the cause. What I love about this is when parents can do this, they'll open up this timeline and they'll see a series of things that have occurred over their child's life. You now found the root to the infection, and the
Mm.
infection is the fear because we are not designed to be living in fear. Fear is supposed to get activated and then it's supposed to be released. It is a gift from God It is his design in order to keep us safe, but we are
Mm-hmm.
not to live in that state. So we just want to be curious and say, what has happened in my kiddo's life that I just need to come surround them and help them bring healing? And my relationship is key to that. I would also add that sometimes as parents, we're not supposed to do everything. We can't be the superhero all the time in our kiddo's life. Sometimes we need to reach out to a professional to get help so
Mm-hmm.
that we can join the parents in their healing journey. And so what happens now is, like, just like the hospital, the doctor comes in and says, you know what? I think there was something that got lodged in there. What was your kid doing today? Well, I was playing out in the playhouse. It was there wood there. And all of a sudden you come to realize deeply planted is the sliver. And I want
Right.
to say that that's like our stories, is that the doctor says, okay, let's get the sliver out. And then the healing takes place. And that's what we
Mm-hmm.
have to see. Our stories got to get the sliver out in order to experience the fullness of our healing. So that, so you get the cause to the fear, and then we unlock it to peace, neutralize the fear by bringing healing to our stories. So
Mm-hmm.
we have to go back to go forward. That's
Right.
important. We'll live in the past. We go back to bring healing to our past so we actually can move forward and live from a place of freedom. And that applies to our kids too. Like, we all have the same brain. It's just where we are developmentally in our brain.
Right. Oh,
Hmm.
yeah, that's so good. You have already talked with us, Tina, about not in judgment, but just looking at ourselves as moms, and our identity, how we feel about ourselves. And you say in your book that you challenge us to start with ourselves and extend love as we begin our own healing journey. And you tell us to look in the mirror to determine the messages that we perceive, we believe, and speak over ourselves. On the Renewed Mama podcast, we're always talking, paying attention to what we're thinking and saying and how we're responding, what we're believing. But
Mm-hmm.
you and I both know that we get a lot further in that healing and understanding our stories faster when we get help rather than trying to do it all on our own. And so tell us what we can do on our own, and then tell us what are the signs where we need to step out and ask for help.
Hey, I love that. I am such a big believer in journaling.
Mm,
And I think for us as moms, we always have so much going on, right? Often I would say we're the calendar holder, right?
mm,
We're managing our kids' schedules, we're managing to make sure they're doing well, meals planned, grocery shopping. And if you have a spouse that you're trying to, divvy up those activities, it's beautiful, but sometimes that's not always the case. And so we have all of this stuff going on, which we don't know what the internal messages are, right? We're just going from one thing to the next. And all of a sudden, we go to sit down at the end of the day and we have this heaviness. And we're like, why do I have this heaviness? Like, and then you go and you replay your day. It's like, I went here, I
mm,
went here. I felt like that was functional. I got my to do list. Maybe I've got two things I didn't get checked off, or maybe it's a little bit more. And what you're doing is you're reflecting about your achievements, and you don't realize that what you've done is you've created your identity in your checklist.
mm,
So all of a sudden, we're sitting there, and we just sit with it. We go to sleep. We do the replay, and I always think I'm going to age myself. The broken records, like when I was a kid, and the record that the arm came off,
right, right,
and
right.
you hear it over and over and over. That's what it feels like for moms, is that they wake up the next day with the same task list, the same calendar of events. And again, the heaviness sits in, and you're like, what is going on? Like, I feel like I'm functioning. I feel like I'm doing everything. Yeah, I didn't get these two things done. But that internal messaging system keeps replaying it, and we're not catching it.
Mm,
And so the biggest thing that we have to do is we got to slow down, and maybe at the end of the day, and we got to begin to write, what is the feeling I'm having? And I always say, if we could let our body speak for us, what would our
mm,
body tell us? So if my heart could speak right now, I'm sitting here in my chair, my kids are in bed, and I'm just feeling this heaviness. I feel emotion, and I just don't know why. I would say, let your heart speak for you. If my heart could put some words on the paper, what would my heart say? My heart might say, I feel like I failed today. I feel
Mm.
like I didn't get everything I was supposed to get done. And I feel like I failed. So do I feel like I failed my kids? I failed my kids because I didn't show up here. So we can't change something until we acknowledge what it is we're telling ourselves. And journaling is one of the most powerful ways to get it out and
Mm.
to begin to explore and let those parts of us sometimes, as our heart begins to put things down on the paper, the next question in our journaling time is, have I felt this feeling for a long time? Have I
Mm.
always felt like I have failed? Or does it feel like more of a recent thing? And oftentimes what moms say is, oh my goodness, this feeling I remember since I was a kid. And
Ah.
all of a sudden, all as you're journaling, you're starting to realize this experience of feeling what I'm feeling, the same feeling in my body, the same feeling in my heart. Why is this so familiar? It's become so much a part of my existence that all of a sudden you start getting flashes of memories as a child sitting in your bed. Maybe you're holding your favorite stuffy, the blanket is over your head, and this flash of memory comes. It's like, oh my goodness, I can remember when I was 5 years of age and I felt like I failed then, and that same feeling is here. And you've been trying to compensate by having this to-do list. Your identity is now on your to-do list because that little girl once upon a time ago said, I will never have that feeling again. So the
Mm.
more I try to achieve, the more I try to do, it's going to fix that feeling, and it hasn't fixed it. So we first have to be able to do that. But what the beautiful thing is that when we try to get ourselves unstuck, it's really hard to do that, because the biggest thing that I want everybody to hear is that we become hurt because someone has hurt us. We don't ever live in a place of hurt or brokenness because outside of human relationships. If we've experienced something like a house fire or a tornado, oftentimes those experiences are an event and people don't actually hold them. It might be traumatic. You can work through it just like that. But the things that people really get stuck on is when another human hurts them, even if
Mm.
it's unintentional. So, what I say is, if you're a mom who's been journaling, you've been doing your stuff, maybe you've even done a timeline because you're like, I'm going to do a timeline for my life,
Mm-hmm.
have to recognize, man, I've been trying to work through this on my own and I'm really stuck. That is the time you need to reach out and get help. Because just like I was saying, if we get broken in relationship, we only can heal in relationship. We
Mm.
actually need another human in relationship who values us, who has expressions of love, and even a professional can give you the experience of being able to say, you're seen and you're heard, and I'm here to heal your story. And
Mm.
again, we're not meant to walk our stories out by ourselves. That's not how we're designed. That's not how God designed us. We're to be in relationship with people.
Mm. Oh, yeah, that's so good.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Tell us what services you offer through TJS counseling. Tell us how you help others heal their
Okay.
stories.
So this has always been, I've been in the field for such a long time. So my greatest joy is to see people set free. And
Mm.
so so at Tina J. Smith and Associates, so we do counseling, psychotherapy. It's one and the same. One goes, deeper. Some people just need solutions around, but my heart and how my mission is to get to the root system, because I know that people can be free. So I always say we make people do really hard work. You're showing up, you're doing hard work. But when you're free, there's such a great feeling. So we
Mhm.
work with children, we work with teens, we work with families, we work with marriages, because we believe in the whole package of families, children, teens. And so the biggest thing also, that we really try to tell parents is, when we work with kids, we actually work with you too. We don't believe that kids can rise up in their healing without integrating the parents in the work of a
Mm.
child. So we do what's called integrative attachment work, where there's been attachment fractures. That repair happens here as we help support parents knowing how to repair their attachment, because again, no parent goes in with the intent on fracturing the child's attachment, their secure
Right.
attachment. They go in and they don't even realize it. So we bring education. We want to repair that, because we know that a thriving child is a child who is seen and a parent is walking alongside them. So it is so important. It's foundational to our existence that caregivers are showing up for their kiddos. So we work with the parents. With teenagers, it's always a little bit different because we want to create safety for the teens. We really want the parents to be involved, but teens might not approve that. So we try to
Mm.
work with the stage of the teen, integrating the parents where we can because it's still important. Yeah, so we do all of it. We get to the root system. We want to restore relationships. We want people to be thriving. We want to teach them how to do this. Therapy is not supposed to be long term. Like when I say long term, it feels long term when you're in it, but it's not supposed to be lifelong.
Hmm.
So it may operate from it feels like a longer term process, but you're not to be in therapy forever.
Yeah.
You feel like you can sustain yourself too, right? And we have other supports that we want. Our friends, our family want to show up in our life too. And so knowing how all of that takes place is important.
Right, right. Well, tell us so those listening by audio can hear, and then I'll
Yes.
also leave a link in the show notes. Where can people who say, I need Tina's help, reach out to you?
Absolutely. Okay, so people can reach out. There's our phone number, which is 519-281-1845. We have an intake coordinator who has hours during the week, so they can go onto Facebook. We're on Facebook and Instagram. And even if you just search up Tina J. Smith and Associates, you'll actually see the intake hours. So if you want to call, you can actually text as well. So we want to be as open as possible for people. So you can text, you can call, you can email, which is intake at, and then my initials, TJS Counseling with two L's. We're the Canadian spelling of counseling, .ca. You can go on our website, which is again is www.tjscounselingwith2ls.ca. There is a contact form in there that you can just message and it gets submitted and it gets rerouted to our email. Yeah, so we're on social media. Check our website out. And we love people. We want to just see them healed. We want families to be restored. That is our heart here. So if anybody wants to reach out, we are here. We are here to help.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Tina, for all that you shared. It was absolutely amazing.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I was
Yeah.
so appreciative.
Wasn't that so good? Oh, I loved everything that Tina shared. What did you like or learn from Tina? Share in the comments below because we would love to hear from you. Mama, would you share this episode with every mama you know? It will help us to connect better with our children and our spouse, to understand how our body handles trauma, and help our children to feel seen and heard. Remember that you can watch the Renewed Mama podcast on YouTube while you wash dishes or fold laundry. Watch on the channels Speak Life Badges and Renewed Mama Coaching. If the Renewed Mama podcast encourages you, would you take 1 minute and leave a review on Apple Podcasts or comment on a YouTube video? Your review helps the podcast to grow so that more mamas find it and can stay renewed too. I appreciate it so much.
For more resources, visit the Renewed Mama podcast, Renewed Mama Coaching, Speak Life Badges, and Austin's Kids Club.